Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this session that is called Video Games and Literature, Stories that Engage. My name is Florent Morin. I'm an independent game designer and head at The Pixelant, and I'm going to be the host of this session with three very nice and interesting panelists that I'm going to present now. And they have all worked on a game that is directly linked to literature. First is Sophie Gambon, and she has worked on. Hi, Sophie.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. And okay, I have a little issue with my screen sharing. Why is it doing that? Okay, no, I just misclicked. Sorry. And she has worked on a game that is called The Kingdom of Istyald, and here's a quick video. So Sophie is digital project manager at France National Library within the digital publishing service, which produces websites, videos, and applications for educational and cultural mediation. And tonight she's going to talk a lot about the universe of fantasy, a literary genre that has been kind of adapted into a video game by the BNF, as we say in French. Then we have Tracy Felton, and Tracy has worked on a video game that is called, aptly called Walden, a game. And here's a little video presentation of it.
What if we could all go to the woods to live deliberately?
So Tracy is a professor at USC Games and director of the USC Games Innovation Lab, an experimental game research group known for producing games such as Walden, a game, and The Night Journey with artist Bill Viola. She is the author of Game Design Workshop, a play-centric approach to creating innovative games, and she holds the Electronic Arts Endowment Chair in Interactive Entertainment at USC. And the third participant of this roundtable is Imre Yele. Hi, Imre. And he worked on a game called Animal Farm that I'm going to show to you very quickly.
Beasts of England, beasts of Ireland, beasts of every land and clime, hearken to my joyful tidings of the golden future time.
So Imre Yele is an independent creative director of video games and other immersive entertainment. He co-founded Bossa Studios, and he adapted Orwell's Animal Farm into a game. And of course, he's going to tell us everything about it tonight. But so first, I wanted to tell you that you are more than welcome to ask questions in the Q&A section of the chat. I'll try to squeeze them in the discussion, but anyway, there'll be room at the end of the session for for all the questions you might have to the panelists. And now we are going to start the conversation. But so the first question I wanted to ask the three of you is, what are for you the specificities of video games and the specificities of books? What do they have in common, if they have things in common, and what opposes them? Maybe Tracy would like to answer that question first. Yeah, okay. Big one. It's a big one. I know.
Thanks for putting me on the hot seat, Florent. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's interesting, right? Because we are definitely talking about two expressive types of media, each of which has its own type of language, right? I think that if we come down to the bare bones of it, literature is about language, right? The expressive potential of literature is based in whatever language that literature is created in. I would argue, some people say, oh, wait, literature is passive, right? But I would actually argue literature is as interactive as games are, even though in most cases you can't have influence on it. On the other hand, we have games which also are a type of language, right? There is a language of play that we've built up understanding of through our years of playing different games. Here we're dealing with a visual storytelling, generally, not always, but we're generally dealing with a kind of visual storytelling and a kind of language of interactivity. We also, in games, and having met a game with lots of text in it, we also use language in our games. So in many ways, we've layered on the pieces of cinematic storytelling, of language storytelling, and of interactive storytelling. We build those all together into the expressive potential of games. I personally love literature. And I don't see any sort of value judgment between those. But I will say that the mix of media that is present in games is a really wonderful potential for me.
Thank you. Very interesting. And Sophie, in the French National Library, you have a lot of books, obviously, but also more and more games in the collection. So is there a difference in the approach between books and games for the French National Library?
The French National Library have a department, audiovisual department. So it's what you say is that it's quite also important to show works of video games and cinema films and also music, to conserve it and to offer to the public these works. This is quite also important than books, So the National French Library when you have a book, when you're reading a book, you can deposit it at the National French Library just for legal depot, So we have a lot of works, but not only books and a lot of films. And so it's very important. It's our past now.
But I imagine that it's also more complicated to archive games, because books are books. Once they are printed, you can keep them. But games are linked to technology, a device and stuff like that. So it's probably more difficult to keep games for a long time.
Of course. You can have objects. You can have a CD or something. But when it's online, you have to deposit the code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's probably one of the many differences between games and books. Imre, I see you're coughing, so it's very rude of me to give you the mic now, but what other differences or similarities you see between books and games?
First of all, I'm clearly the comic relief here, because I'm sitting between these extremely well-educated and knowledgeable people. I am coming in from the bottom up. Is that what's fun, And active engagement, I believe, is fun. I mean, I love books. I was that guy who forget food because I was reading a book. But that said, I do believe that games are extremely powerful, even though Tracy alluded on this, that books there is interactivity in a book, because the book challenges me to imagine things visually in my head. Even though I agree with that, I still believe that games allow a level of engagement in the story. I think that it's the difference between sympathy and empathy and compassion. When you get engaged with the subject, it's not just about looking at a subject, but being in that subject. And I think games can reduce the amount of energy the consumer have to put in to be engaged in a topic. But with a book, especially if it's a hard book, it must be a lot of effort needed to be as engaged. But with a video game, it's often easier to get in, so to speak. So this is not a value judgment of one over the other, but I just feel that as a storyteller, I love the opportunities I have in games.
And this is a perfect translation to my next question. And it's also Aladiab's question, in a sense, in the chat. He asks, to what extent do you feel as a designer the need to take a backseat to the original voice of the story to shine versus putting your authorial voice in it? And that's a question of the process. So maybe, Tracy, you could try to explain to us what was the process, because Walden is a huge monument of literature. So how do you manage to work on that and try to make a game and respect the author's vision, but also put some of your knowledge and your know-how into the process?
It's a great question, and I think it's a little bit of a softball for me because Ala actually worked on the team. Hi, Ala. Thank you for the question. So this is a really wonderful point. And for me, it was extraordinarily important to respect the original text and the philosophy and the intent of Thoreau's original experiment in the work that we were making. I think that what I brought was ability to maybe distill the experiment that Thoreau was creating into a game-like language, right? Taking the language, the mechanics that we understand as gamers and putting them into the game and then twisting them to give us a little thought about, well, wait a minute, what are we trying to achieve? And to have some of those original thoughts around Thoreau's philosophy, because we realized that those game mechanics weren't actually getting us what we thought they were getting us. So for me, it was always, we did a ton of research, worked with scholars, worked with libraries, and it was always, when there was a question about what should we do, it was always, okay, well, let's go back to the text and find a reference for that. So we were always, throughout the entire process, trying to find some textual reference, either in Walden itself or in Thoreau's other writings or in his in scholars' interpretations, in order to back up what we were going to do. And then the overarching, I guess what I'll call the interpretation is really mine, right? So there are so many themes in Walden, and I chose to focus on a particular few of them, specifically one that I thought was really pertinent to modern day, which is trying to balance the time we have in life with our responsibilities, to our families, to our friends, to our beliefs, and trying to, how do we live a deliberate life while we have all of these things pulling on us, right? And showing how we have to make active choices in order to live that deliberate life that we have set out to do.
Thanks, Tracy. Imre, I'd like to hear you about your process with Animal Farm, but we also have this question by Boon Young Kwok in the chat. How do you reconcile the linearity of the storyline in literature, which may affect the degree of engagement in games, with the expectation of gamers, readers who may expect a bit more possibilities? And I think that's a perfect question for you, because Animal Farm is a very systemic game in which you make lots of choices. So it's a very good example about how to delinearize an experience, or not really delinearized, because the story still progress in a linear fashion, but to like explore the whole possibilities that did not necessarily happen in the book. So I'd love to hear you on that.
So two quick comments on this, and I'm going to try to keep it short. The first of all is that I think something Tracy said was very important, is that you have to make a choice of where you focus. And I said this in the past, and I keep repeating this, that I don't think there is adaptation without interpretation. I don't think you can read a book without interpreting in a unique way, let alone transport it into even translating in a different language. It's still a book. Your translation is going to be slightly different because you imprint yourself in that work. So I think that's it's pretty much unavoidable. And the responsibility of the creator is to be aware of that and to make those choices and not allow subconscious and this kind of subliminal things to come in, but make sure that it's managed. Even if it's an emotional drive, I am aware that that's happening. So in the case of Animal Farm, for example, I grew up in a communist country. And my family was against the regime. I had a family member gone missing, never to be seen again. I carry a lot of emotions about the subject matter. And so when we looked at Animal Farm, we actually made the choice very consciously to stick to the book as close as possible, because we felt that we would rather be criticized for being too close rather than being too far from it. And so that process, of course, made it difficult. and a huge credit to Emily Short, who was our writer narrative designer, because she's done a lot of work to ensure that whenever we extend, because interactivity requires gameplay, right? It requires content. And Animal Farm has a lot of content which is not just story-led, it's mechanical, like how you run the farm. But still a lot of story content where we had to make choices. And so what we've done was actually similar to Walden, I think, is that we looked at not just Animal Farm, but 1984 and other non-fiction work of George Orwell. And then we looked at history. We looked at other oppressive regimes and the technique they used, and we were mirroring them in the different paths in the game. So there are different types of ending and different types of outcomes you can get, and those are all built. And we constantly went back, and the question was not, is it in Animal Farm? The question was, is it lining up with the spirit of what we firmly believe and what Orwell scholars firmly believe that Orwell intended with his book? So I think it's often the question is not just looking at what happened in the book, but why it is happening in the book. And then when you translate into a new media, again, let it be even just a translation or taking it to any other medium, then when you fill up the content, then that's what you're matching against. Not just on the 5th page, on the 6th line, the 3rd word is this. But actually ask yourself, why is that word there? And then when you try to line that up, I think it's a much better and much more faithful technique to adapt, especially when to go into new media.
So I imagine that your design process in like trying to imagine what would be interesting gameplay choices for players in the game and how to engage them with interactivity was explained with this in mind, like what is Orwell trying to do in his book, and how can we translate that into interactivity that would go in the same direction?
I think that one benefit of working from a proven piece of literature is that we are literally standing on the shoulders of giants, right? In this case, the singular giant of Orwell. And so, but when we have to think about what choices we put in front of the players, the trick is again that I'm not necessarily concentrating on this is exactly what happened on page 12. What I care about is how did it make me feel, and then try to put choices in the game which hopefully triggers the same emotional, intellectual kind of reactions from the audience. because you can't match the content one-to-one. Even in a book-to-film adaptation is difficult, let alone book to interactive. So you have to think about what's happening there. I'm going to use one quick example, is that in Animal Farm, they mentioned the use of birds as spies who survey the neighboring farms and get information. So it's just one small step to say, well, why would the pigs not use the birds to also spy on their own animals? Of course they would. It's logical. And if you look at 1984, there is the giant TV screen which watches everyone in their homes. So you know that Orwell very well understood mass surveillance of your own populace and how that is used for oppression. So we felt that even though it was not explicitly stated in Animal Farm, it was a perfect fit. So that's how you extend it. That's how you extend the content. That's where you put in the choice, because now I can put it in front of the player. Do you want to do it or not? And then those choices cumulatively decide which of the ending you get. So it's always not about what, but why. It's thinking on a higher level, and then you establish those patterns in your game, and then you go back to the original work and say, look, I can use this entire paragraph and put it in my game, because now I can, cut and paste in the right positions because I understood the emotional content of the original work.
Thank you, Imre. And Sophie, your endeavor was like somehow even bigger, because what you tried to do is to put an entire literary genre of fantasy into a video game. So what was the process behind that? You're on mute, Sophie.
Sorry. Yes, 2 years ago, the bibliothèque has offered an exhibition about a famous fantasy author, Tolkien. And in this context, we wanted to propose a website about the literary genre of fantasy in general. And we wanted to reach a large audience, especially young audience. And so we thought it was a good thing to propose on this website a video game. So that's why we contact you, Florent. And to design a video games will be a sort of represents all the archetypes of the fantasy that some things we can find on fantasy works, like witches and dwarfs and elves and dragons and all sorts of archetypes, but also to present the fantasy as the genre is naked in the Victorian England, when with the beginning of the massive industrialization, and with a society in search of escape and fantasy. So the development of the genre itself is linked to a past, somewhere, an old past, enchanted past, that is destroyed by the industry somewhere, and the war also. So we wanted to create a game we have all these components, and of course a game which allow young people to go easily, maybe on the website, and to entry on the website to know more about it. So so it's why we call you to this huge challenge and to work with the illustrator Anato Finstark, and to create this game. And also another archetype is, of course, that there is a hero with a quest, and the hero have to save the world. And so, of course, now here the hero is the player, and the player will encounter some creatures and talk to people of the world of Istyald, because Istyald is the tree of knowledge of this world. And in fact, it's not the same that in Walden or Animal Farm, because it's not a literary adaptation. It's a creation. It's a creation. So the goal is to for the player to save the tree of Istyald, the tree of knowledge, and he have to discuss with everyone and find some object and resolve some puzzles, and finally maybe to save Istyald. So we are very, very proud of this game, which represents some ways in its way the fantasy literature and the archetypes.
And also, it's very interesting that the French National Library, which is a huge cultural institution, would actually be very adamant to work on a game in order to just show, communicate about its exhibitions and its collections and everything. And that leads us to the next thing I wanted to talk to you, the three of you, about, is the cultural weight of games versus the cultural weight of literature. Because for a lot of people, literature has a cultural weight that is significantly higher than games. Games are often considered fun, trivial, light, whereas books are often deep, strong, worthy of one's time, serious. And so that might be a little bit of a cliche, but I think it's a cliche that's still very present in a lot of people's hearts and minds. And I wanted to hear the three of you about that. Like, what do you think about that? Do you think it's evolving over time? Do you think someday games will be praised as high as literature is today? And maybe Tracy, you could share your thoughts on that with us.
Okay, yeah, I'll take the hot seat again. And I just want to say sorry, my whole computer crashed, so I had to quickly get it back up and running.
We missed you, so that's why I asked you the question first.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting problem, and part of it has to do with your perspective, right? So, yes, the traditional perspective is that literature is, one of the higher arts, although technically, as novels first arose, they were actually considered popular culture, right? And it's only, as you sort of come through history, do they become this sort of higher art, right? And we see that happen with many media. We see that happen with films, where they start as this kind of prurient, sort of dark theaters where bad things happen and stuff like, they were not considered high art, and now we call them cinema, right? And then we think of them as high art, some of them, and some of them are still pop culture. So part of it has to do with your sort of perspective, and part of it also has to do with, you asked about importance and weight. Well, you can argue how much impact and weight a piece has. If you are talking about Walden, which is a great piece of American literature, right? Perhaps it has overarching weight in the culture. It certainly does, but actually on a day-to-day basis, it's actually very hard to get new readership for Walden. And the place that it sits in our society today, when people are assigned to read it, they don't want to read it. They have no desire to become educated in that fashion, right? So they're like, oh my God, we have to read this book by this dead guy who went to the woods, and then he just went home and his mom did his laundry. That's like basically what kids know, right? So, but video games hold a very high weight and interest in their culture. So suddenly, if you have this video game about this guy who went to the woods to live this interesting life, that actually has more weight culturally than perhaps the original piece of literature. So I guess my thought here is that saying that literature is high and that games are low is only one perspective. There is also an equally strong argument for the fact that video games are predominant in terms of culture, and that literature is kind of hanging on by its fingernails.
Interesting point of view. Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Imre, what is your take on that? Like, do you agree with Tracy? Do you have a different point of view?
Oral storytelling is there is some evidence to prove it is 40,000 years old, I think. Written storytelling must be a few thousand. Modern printing is 500-600. Moving image storytelling is 100, 150, something like that, 130, I think. They just have a heads up, like they have a leg up on us, right? In video games. So give us 150 years and see what we can do. We have maybe 50. So I just feel that there is this constant obsession about finding our Citizen Kane, that prove that we're as worthy, or find out Shakespeare, and I think that if you sign up to that belief that that is what it is, then my answer is that, well, see how long it took to make Citizen Kane, and we're getting there. My argument is that we already have it, but the bigger argument is that I don't think we need it. We are our own thing, and the world changes. There are certain things which had a shockwave. We just look at the cultural change mass printing brought. You suddenly can spread knowledge and spread information in an insane rate compared to what it was before. And that's a change in society. We often write up things, big cultural changes to industrial revolution, etc. But mass printing of books, come on, the same with the internet, is access to knowledge. And I think that as culture changes, we as humanity are evolving as a race. I know it's very lofty words now, but we are. So our forms of entertainment and needs are changing. And new generations are raised and grow up in an environment where they are experiencing very different stimuli. And so their entertainment jokes are different. Compare a very funny joke you see today, what was very funny 50 years ago. And even just remove like things which luckily we left behind, or slowly started to leave behind in, sexism and racism or whatever. Just to take a joke which is none of that, like it's just a normal, healthy joke, and compare that 50 years ago and today. Compare a stand-up comedian's routine today and 20 years ago. So I feel like we are changing, and we shouldn't compare. I think it's perfectly okay for me to read a book and play a video game and enjoy them in a very different way, the same way as I can enjoy a burger or pasta. And it's like they don't compete with each other. They're just types of things that you can consume.
Yeah, I guess my question was, like, I completely agree with both your points, but I guess my question was more one of the general perception. I think we can have very, very efficient arguments to explain why games should be considered higher a form of art as it is today. But still, if you ask people on the street, for instance, the vast majority of them would probably rank literature higher. So I agree.
Yeah, but can I jump in, Florent? Because
of course you can. Tracy.
So let me. Here's a little anecdote about Walden, for example. Okay, so a lot of people ask me this question. They're like, well, isn't it ironic to make a game about the book of Walden, where he's talking about going and living in the woods? And I'm like, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking me. You're saying it's more ironic to make a piece of game media about going to live in the woods than it is to write a piece of literature about going to live in those. They're both media. They're both lenses, right? But many people feel weirdly protective of the original piece of literature. And they're like, I can't believe that, someone thought they could make a game out of this, right? As if somehow I was degrading it. But those same people often tell me, but, why would you make a game out of the novel Walden? They haven't even read it. They don't understand that's not even a novel. They don't even understand that's a nonfiction piece of work, right? So they're protecting something that they have on a pedestal that they don't even have any idea about, that they probably even haven't read the whole thing, maybe a chapter when they were in high school, right? And there's this, I think, a huge hypocrisy in the way that we hold literature up on a pedestal. And we actually don't even necessarily engage with it. why not make culture around those ideas in a medium that we know we engage with a lot?
There are people who can't tell in a blind test, white and red wine apart, and yet they're gonna say that wine is a more noble drink than beer. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, it's not. I feel that, and I'm guilty of this. I was on the BAFTA Games Committee for 5 years, and I remember for years had this obsession that no, the BAFTA Game Award has to be on BBC One. Like that's, and then realized it doesn't matter. And frankly, most of us, we are backwards compatibility. We do not matter. It's people under 20 who matters. And I always use my nieces and nephews who range from 6 months old to 30 as my control group. And it's fascinating, and they just, it's not only that they like different things, but the method how they even consider any form of media is utterly different. They read the same book as I do, and not only they read differently because they have different lived experiences, they read it differently because their entire way of thinking is different from mine. And so I think we are going through a shift. I think we are the racing horses when cars started to run on the streets. I think we still have a place, but I think increasingly we are going to be marginalized because our thinking is still using the wrong models. And it's a lot of effort to learn these. And I am actually just really excited to see the new generation of video games who just don't care anymore. They just don't try to please anyone. They don't try to I have to prove myself. No, these new designers come in, and I still have that chip on my shoulder. And the new designers come in, and I was like, that's not even a question. It's not even that I decided that the answer is no. I didn't even ask the question. And that's wonderful, I think. It's great because it frees us up for new artistic, self-expression.
I agree with all that very much, because when we worked on Bury My Love, I faced a lot of backlash by people saying the exact same thing. How can you make a game about people dying? How can you make something as tasteless as that? And it's a shame, and you should be ashamed. And what those people didn't know is that when I asked Dana, the woman whose life story the game is based on, I would like to make a game adaptation of your life and other refugees' life. She was 23 at the time, 24, and she was like, yes, completely do that. I will do everything in my powers to help you. I will answer every question. I will share all my knowledge of what I've lived, because I think games are relevant, and it's a very powerful way to tell the story we faced. And yeah, those people who came at me, they probably did not even play the game. So yeah, sure, I agree. And I also think that
I agree with you. They probably didn't, because anyone who played your game, by the way, knows that there's anything but offensive. It's heart-wrenching. It's a heart-wrenching game.
Well, thank you. But I also think it's important for institutions, and Sophie, I would like to have your say on this. I also think still it's important to official, big, huge institutions such as the French National Library, for instance, to also say that games matter anyway, even though we as game designers don't have to care about that. It's still important that those institutions say, yes, we should, for instance, preserve games. So, Sophie, what is your take on that?
I think it depends also. It depends a lot of the nature of the book or the video game. Maybe such game, such as skill or fighting games, call on qualities that we are not used to motivating in reading books, which call for attention and a certain concentration. But as we can see today, other games can quite appeal to these qualities by proposing, for example, to give to reading and to imaginating, to have reflection and deduction, like your three games. So I think it depends also on the game or the books, I think. And the importance of the reading and the reflection on the gameplay. if you take fighting games, it's not very. You have some very interesting things, but it's not the same motivations.
But then again, the French National Library is like keeping a copy of any game whatsoever.
Yeah,
like
of course. Yes,
you-
but it's of course, because it's our patrimoine. You know, it's our patrimoine. So our patrimoine. It's not. How do you say in English? I'm sorry. It's not only books. It's games. It's films. It's movies. It's music. So it's totally normal to keep all things without any limitation, and all games, even fighting games. And we have also a VR experience, so we can play some games very fighting. But I think you have proposed it for you have proposed a game for the fantasy, for the Kingdom of Istyald, which the reading is very important in the game. Because if you don't read all the matter said the character, you can't go very far. So it was interesting for this subject also, I think, and to sometimes propose something more slow. I think it's important.
Yeah, maybe making a game about a literary genre that is in itself literary.
Yeah,
was an interesting idea. Yeah. So we're nearing the end of this very interesting discussion. So I'll try to take some questions from the audience, and if you want to take the stage and ask your question yourself, you can. And maybe I see a question by Raphael Murphy. I don't know, Raphael, if you want to come on stage and ask your question yourself. If you want to, I think you have to click a button or something like that. I'm not completely sure how you're supposed to do it, but if I don't see any sign of activity, I will read it myself. Okay, so I will. Is part of the problem that we generally call these experiences games, which leads to an assumption that the goal of the experience is to have fun or be entertained, when the goal is often very different. Like, is there a problem with the word game?
I have an answer to that. I put it in the chat, but I'll talk about it for a moment because I feel very strongly about it. And I feel strongly that we need to, as practitioners, as participants in the field, we need to grow the idea of what games are and what they can be. That if we back away and we start calling them, specific things, like this type of particular subject matter is not a game, it's a, I don't know what it is, right? We name it, this thing and X and Y and Z, that we lose coherence as a field, right? A movie is a movie, a book is a book, right? Now they have subcategories, right? You can say it's a detective novel, or you can say that it's an action movie, right? Or it's a documentary movie. And I don't have any problem with that, saying something is like a documentary game, or it's, a game, serious game, or games for impact, or things like that. But it is a game. And the more that we sort of back away from allowing them to be called games, the more that we allow that initial prejudice that you brought up to take control of our own field. So that's my opinion. My opinion is we need to own that word, and we need to expand it and grow it and push it and be proud of it. Be proud of the word game.
Imre or Sophie, maybe?
I feel like if you look at films and look at what is involved in the word film, and what are the worst and best and width and depth of filmmaking, and then afterwards not understanding how games can be a wide media. I feel like when someone asking these questions, the reason, again, I don't know if I'm maturing or immaturing, but I just don't engage in these conversations anymore, because I found that when someone asks these questions, they don't want to have a conversation. They want to have a gotcha. You know,
We lost Florent.
That's okay. We can. It's fine. We can do it without him. Hopefully he'll be back soon. So when I hear these questions, I feel like someone is just trying to get a fight. Like anyone who even a minimum level understands interactive entertainment or whatever, they understand. It's okay to be tribal. It's okay that someone thinks that they prefer detective novels over romance novels or vice versa. That's fine. Someone likes this type of game or that type of game. But anyone who uses these arguments to prove something that is not worthy, they are again on the wrong side of history. Like they are going to be left behind, because it's just. And I love the fact that I am talking to someone and I'm working with a theater company, and we had this problem at some point. That is this a game? Is this immersive? Is it interactive? What is this? And we were like, we don't know. We're not entirely sure what it is. And I love that. And I love that because that's where the real cool shit happens. And that's when Sophie is gonna get mad because she doesn't know which shelf to put the end result on, because she won't be able to tell if it's a book or a game. And I love that. I think that's an awesome thing. And anyone who tries to turn it into a criticism, they just don't get culture.
Here. Absolutely.
Yeah, very interesting point. I have another question from Matthew McGowan, which is relevant to the nature of games. So the very first question we talked about in this discussion. A few years back, I read some research that argued that novels are so successful at engendering empathy in their audience, in part because the reader is locked into a novel's linear narrative. Thinking about games, especially those which have empathy as one of their focuses, where would you situate games' more choice-based environments in relation to engendering empathy with their audiences? In other words, is interactivity getting in the way of generating empathy to the player?
I just want to say two words, and that's Brian Upton, Situational Play, has written a wonderful book about this. And the mistake that we make is thinking that because games are interactive and we are making choices, that is the core of what game experience is about, I think has misled us. The core of what game experience is about is the feeling, the situation that we are building in our heads throughout the process of experiencing the game. Choices are a part of that, but what actually attaches us and makes us care about the gameplay is all going on here in our hearts and our minds, right? And that's about the situation. And choices are only a very small part of that. So I actually believe that games in some ways are even more directly empathetic than any other media, because we must care in order to make those choices. If we're just pressing buttons, we're not actually playing the game.
I'm sorry, but how much I agree with Tracy is that I always use this, that The Walking Dead is not about zombies. It's about people under extreme pressure. And that's what it is that it's about the setting. And honestly, if someone hasn't been engaged emotionally with a game, they either didn't want to or they haven't found a game yet which will engage them emotionally. And again, every year we see more and more cooler stuff coming out. So yeah.
You talk about The Walking Dead. When I played the first season of The Walking Dead, Telltale's The Walking Dead, I was unable to retell my experience to anybody for maybe a month because I would start crying every time I would try to do so. So yeah, very, very efficient way to generate empathy. Is there any question that the audience would like to ask? Because if not, I have a last question for you because we have like 1 minute left. So let's do it very quickly, each and every one of you. If you had to adapt one book into a game, which one would that be and why? You have 30 seconds each.
I'm just going to say that I have two, and I'm trying to get the rights for both. One
You're
is closer
cheating
than the
already, Imre. Oh, so you won't say it. You won't say because you want to get the rights. Okay. And Sophie, maybe?
I don't know. Maybe The Thousand Nights. Why not? Because it's a long time. A lot of I don't know.
The longest game ever. And Tracy?
Yeah, I always actually answer this with joke, and I see that someone in the chat has already heard my joke because I always say I would do Ulysses. But the problem with Ulysses is that the Joyce family does not allow that they still obviously hold the copyright, and they don't allow that kind of adaptation. So that's just a joke. I honestly, I don't have a text, but I will tell you this: I've learned over the course of this experience that I would actually adapt a short story. I would go shorter on the text because creating the possibility space of a full 200 odd page not piece of nonfiction was so much more than I thought it was going to be. So a short story of some kind.
Making games in general is completely crazy ideas anyway. So yeah, making games about long books is probably an even worse idea. I agree with that.
I thought it was going to be so easy, but yeah, no.
Yeah, nope. No, just because the book already exists doesn't mean that making a game is easy. Yeah, no, definitely not. Thanks a lot for being part of this I hope, very interesting discussion. At least I was very interested, so I hope that's a good sign. And yeah, good the rest of the festival for each and every one of you. Imre, you made everybody in the chat hungry by discussing the powers of hamburgers and pasta. So yeah, some people are getting a lunch break right now, I guess. And yeah, that's all for us. Thanks a lot. And
thank you, Florent. Bye bye.
You're welcome.
Yes, and thanks everyone for the great questions and the great
chat.
chat.
Of course.
I don't know, is there a place for us to go after this, or we just say goodbye?
I think we can leave on video and stick in the chat a little bit if we want to.
Okay.
I think so. I'm not completely sure.
I'm not sure either. Okay. All right.
Bye,
take care.
people.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye bye.